Wonderful. And so I think we've got most of everyone logged on today, so we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. We've got a great presentation put together for you. I don't have facility condition data to meet the July 1st deadline for my asset management plan. So I believe everyone on the call today is a part of the Ontario municipalities dealing with the asset management plan deadline for July 1st. And we've seen an uptake in municipalities reaching out to us asking about facility condition assessments, which is a key part of that asset management plan. And so we thought we'd put a presentation together for some of you that are sort of rushing to meet that deadline. So agenda for today, we'll go through a quick round of introductions. We'll set the table, talk a little bit about today's presentation. We'll talk a little bit about what to do now and what you should be doing after the July 1st deadline. We'll talk about what you should do with the data once you've got it, and then we'll have a Q&A session for any questions. So we'll just do a quick round of introductions here. Our key presenter today is Bill Roth. He's the president and CEO of Roth IAMS. He's also the co-founder of SLAM Technologies. He's got over 28 years of experience working within the public sector, specifically on that facility infrastructure asset management. Just to give you a little bit of background into Roth IAMS and sort of who we are as an organization. Our vision is to solve the world's deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog crisis. So I believe everyone on this call today is a part of Ontario municipalities. All of you are dealing with aging infrastructure buildings. You probably likely have a long list of work that needs to be completed and likely not enough funding to complete all of that work. So really all of the services that Roth IAMS provides is catered towards helping solve that issue within the public sector. The IAMS in Roth IAMS stands for Integrated Asset Management Strategies. So really what we're talking about here is trying to find that sweet spot for organizations between their capital planning excellence, operational excellence, and performance excellence. I think we're up to about 120 staff now across Canada as well as the US. We've worked with over 59 municipalities, over 17 district school boards. We actually have a contract with Ministry of Health, so we're up to over 191 hospitals. And we also have a contract with all of the Ontario colleges and universities. So we're over 68 colleges and universities across Canada as well as the US. We are a proud canoe supplier. We've actually just renewed that contract. We were the highest ranked proponent within our category. It's a great service there to help you streamline that procurement process. And I'm sure Bill will touch on that a little bit more in talking about meeting that July 1st deadline. But if your procurement is familiar with OECM, we're also a supplier with them as well. And with that, I'll hand it off to Bill.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alicia, and thank you all today for joining us. We're going to start a little bit of setting the table and background, and we're going to start with a poll question just to get a sense of where your organizations are at. So if we can launch that first poll, please.
So the poll question is, when is the last time you did an FCA on your portfolio? And the options are, what's an FCA? Within the last 2 years, within the last 5 years, and more than 5 years ago. And we'll just give people a minute or two there to respond. Still a couple responses coming in. But so far, we've got 42% with more than 5 years ago, 26% with what's an FCA, 21% within the last 5 years, and 8% within the last 2 years. So it looks like we've sort of got both ends of the spectrum there.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you all for your feedback there. And so we're going to cover off kind of a lot of stuff today. We're going to kind of run a gamut to try to help you and your organizations figure out kind of what's possible between now and July, and then kind of what can be done thereafter to help improve and enhance your asset management planning process. So Alicia talked a little bit about the integrated asset management framework before, which is the integration between capital planning excellence, operational excellence, and performance excellence. And obviously, a facility condition assessment is really the foundational piece that relates to capital planning. And so we're going to focus primarily in the capital planning sphere today as we talk about the facility condition assessment process. And so the integrated asset management framework, or the onion, if you've been involved with any of our thought leadership, I'm sure you've seen the onion before. But really, as with everything that we do, and the recommendations that we make to our various customers across the municipal and non-municipal sector, is that you really need to start and build everything from the foundation of the business objectives and processes within your organization. And obviously there's the regulation in place to do the asset management planning, but all asset management plans are not created equal, because each organization is going to be unique in some regards. There are regulatory requirements for an asset management plan, but really you want to start with understanding kind of, where you are, why you're beginning, and really beyond supporting our asset management plan, what else, if anything, are we trying to achieve? If really you're just trying to kind of tick a box to meet the requirement to secure the appropriate funding and things like that, that's an okay answer. But if there are other things beyond that you're looking to try to achieve in terms of trying to secure additional funding for addressing deferred capital renewal, or trying to improve the functionality of your portfolio, or the accessibility of your portfolio, or the energy efficiency of your portfolio, what else beyond just meeting the requirements of the regulation are you trying to do? Thinking ahead a little bit to the actual asset management plan itself, what types of levels of service do you want to develop within your asset management plan? So one of the most common levels of service that organizations drive from facility condition assessment is what we call the Facility Condition Index, or FCI. And so as part of the a typical facility condition assessment process, you will get an FCI as well. Beyond that, are there other levels of service that you want to develop in your asset management plan? And do you have the data to develop those levels of service and to measure those levels of service? If you don't, are there other data points that you might want to collect and integrate into your facility condition assessment? Obviously, important, where's the data going to go? And really what we mean by that is, what are the deliverables that you're going to get from your condition assessment? Is it going to be a spreadsheet? Is it going to be software? Do you already have software that you're using that you want to import the data into? Basically, how are you going to get that information when it's delivered? And sort of one of the last questions is, who's going to be responsible for the data going forward? And I'm going to come back to that one a little bit later in the presentation. So basically, what to do now? Well, obviously, July is coming fairly quickly. And so we've really seen an uptick in the last, as Alicia said, an uptick in the last number of weeks from municipalities across the province, trying to get things started before July 1st, which is why we thought we would put this on. But we want to basically be realistic in terms of looking at what can be done between now and July for those that don't have this data in place already. So first things first, there obviously is the procurement issue, right? You have to meet the BPS standards, broader public sector standards, but perhaps you have standing offer agreements within the organization that you can leverage. There's the opportunity to do a fast track RFP. The potential to do a sole source agreement, or Alicia mentioned our cooperative procurement contracts. Though there are a number of cooperative procurement organizations out there. As Alicia mentioned, and you see in the footer of our slides, we do have agreements with two such providers, Canoe Procurement Group of Canada for facility assessment and planning services that covers off FCAs, as well as with OECM, also for FCAs and capital asset management software. So recognizing that to do a traditional procurement can take months and months, you're going to be long past that July 1st deadline if you don't have one of these four options to tap into. But you want to make sure you've got that lined up and understand how that process works so that you can make it as short as possible to leave as much time as you can have, given where we are today on April, I believe it is 14th. Yes, 14th. Sorry. So how much time do you actually have? So getting the data is important, but also getting the data into, excuse me, your asset management plan is also, part of the process. So if you're not the individual who's responsible for the final creation of your asset management plan, you need to connect with them and figure out, what they need from you, what format they need from you, and kind of how much time they need to integrate it into that actual asset management plan. And it may, again, without understanding the process within each of your organizations, it may be too late to get it into sort of a formal plan before July 1st. But I don't think that means you shouldn't proceed or you shouldn't bother to try, because obviously, with anything, ignoring something versus demonstrating that you're in the process is a totally different situation when it comes to any regulation or any potential issues. At least starting is better than not starting at all. So in terms of being realistic, and again, I don't mean to be too negative here, but unless your portfolio is really small, it's very unlikely you would be able to get a full detailed facility condition assessment done in time to integrate within your asset management plan. So really, this is about what options do I have? And so basically, I think there was a number of folks that said, kind of what is a facility condition assessment? So before I dive into the types of data here for just a minute, I'll take a minute to explain at a high level what an FCA is. For those that are less familiar with it, for those that are, hopefully it's a good refresher. So the idea behind a facility condition assessment is that within a building or a facility, you have a bunch of different, what we call elements, and those elements all have a different date of construction. If you have a new building, the dates of construction are probably all the same. However, in an older building, you've probably made repairs over time to different elements within the building. Perhaps you replace the windows, or you replace the roof, or you replace the doors on the building. And so the idea behind a facility condition assessment is you come in and you assess the elements within the building, and for each element on their own, you provide a recommendation, which is either an engineering study, a major repair, or a life cycle replacement recommendation, where you provide a cost to do something, a time to do something, and then details of what's being recommended, so that you can develop a financial forecast that says, hey, I've got to do my roof this year, I've got to do my HVAC next year, I've got to do the electrical the year after that. So it basically gives you a forecast of future capital renewal needs in a facility focused on the elements that are in place. And again, older facilities, multiple additions, or older facilities where there's been a number of different renovations, you can have different dates of installation for a wide range of elements. So if you're also involved with linear infrastructure is different. In some ways, it's simpler, right? Because the number of elements are very small. In a road, you sort of have the surface, the subsurface, and the subgrade. In a facility, you can have, in a complicated facility like, say, a rec center, you could have 100 plus elements within a building, all that age at different rates, all have different dates of installation, and all are used differently in the operation of the facility. So the idea is that FCA gives you a forecast of what you need to spend to keep your building in a state of good repair based on future needs. So Hopefully that gives a little bit of a Coles Notes overview of what an FCA is. As we get into the options here and we start to have a look at some of the data, hopefully it'll get a little bit clearer. So really there are three main types of FCA data sets. We have the modeled life cycle data. We have a time limited forecast, but we're not going to really talk about that one because it doesn't really fit with the asset management planning process. And then we have an element level inventory. So today I'm going to focus on modeled life cycle data and an element level inventory. The modeled life cycle data for consideration before the July 1st deadline, the element level inventory for consideration following the July 1st deadline. However, again, if your portfolio is small and you're able to act quickly, you may be able to get a more detailed element level inventory before that July 1st deadline. But as time continues to tick on, the opportunity to do that becomes a little bit less likely. So for those that can't get a detailed assessment done in time to fit in with your asset management plan, the modeled or life cycle data starts to become an option. It is a lower cost, but as you'll see, it's a much higher level data set. Don't really recommend that it's where you stop, but it's a mechanism by which you can get some information available to you in a short period of time that would allow you to submit your asset management plan, but then build out on that data set as you go along over time to give you a more operational and actionable plan for your facilities. So we'll start with the modeled data. And so there are three types of modeled data sets, three primary types. There's more, but these are the most common ones. And these are the ones that we're going to talk a little bit about today. There are building type models, client informed models, and validated models. So I'm going to go through a little bit more detail on each and give you an example of what a data set for each might look like. So building type models are basically where you break your portfolio down into the types of buildings based on the use, based on the construction type, those sorts of things. You know, in a municipal context could be like fire halls, rec centers, admin buildings, things like that. Basically just creating as, you know, you want there to be as few categories as you can have, but you also want it to be representative. So in a municipal context, there are often, you know, more than just a couple. In a K-12 setting, you could have elementary, secondary, and middle schools. Could be as simple as 3 building types. In a municipal setting, you're probably going to have more like 6 or 7. For larger municipalities, you could have even more than that. But basically, how can I break my buildings down into like groups? And then looking at those groups, what type of elements are typically found within those buildings, right? Every building has a roof, every building has walls. Obviously, you know, rec centers have different elements than a fire hall and then an office building. And so working, you know, and these are things that you would do in cooperation or collaboration with a third party. This is not something that typically most municipalities would have the ability to do in-house, but it is possible that you could do this in-house. And so once you have a list of the elements within a typical building for each site, so you build a model for each of the categories, then you also need to have unit costs for those elements, right? A cost per square foot for a roof, or a cost per square foot of the building for something like plumbing piping, and an expected useful life, or EUL, which is the amount of the length of time that an element should last. So if you have a roof, depending on the type of roof, it could last anywhere between 12 and 50 years. And so that's what an expected useful life is. It's not in reality how long every roof is going to last, but it's a sort of a theoretical or an expected life that says, hey, a roof of that type should last X number of years. You then take, for those buildings, you have the date of construction and or major renovation of the building, and you use that to build out what we call a life cycle model for the theoretical elements within a building. So with the presence or absence, plus the unit cost, the date of construction, and the expected useful life, you're able to project out a fairly high level forecast of renewal needs. So this is just an example of a building type model that you might do at a fairly high level within a facility. So you'll see we use, and most organizations use the Uniformat 2 structure to break their buildings down. It's just an ASTM standard for how you break a building down into its parts. So this is just an example, D30. This is a level 2 Uniformat code for HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So the date of installation, 1967, an EUL of 35 years. So therefore, the replacement year would be 2024 because we've already surpassed the expected useful life of the element. The life cycle model would say replace it now, which actually I guess this should be 2025 at this point in time. Excuse me, but and then an estimated cost for HVAC of $2 million, which is calculated based on the unit cost times the square footage of the building. So fairly high level, right? HVAC, for those of you that are familiar with facilities, obviously there are a number of elements that go into HVAC within a building, but this is rolling everything up at a high level because we're not dealing with a specific building, we're dealing with a theoretical building of this type. So this would sort of be considered the highest level information, but from an asset management plan, right, this would tell you from an asset management planning perspective that based on this level of data in 2024, I should plan from an asset management perspective to potentially spend $2 million on our HVAC equipment. So this is the simplest data set. This is also probably, it's not always the case, but is fairly close to worst case, right? This just says, hey, anything that's old needs to be replaced, and anything in the building is most likely original to the date of construction, which isn't always the case because there's a lot of repairs that go on into a facility. But again, this is the cheapest and quickest form of data that you can get working with a partner. So the next type of model, which is sort of one step up, is what we call a client-informed model. And this is where you, staff on your team that are familiar with your facilities, would review a building type model and make adjustments based on your institutional knowledge of the facilities. So for example, if something was not original to the building, you could adjust the date of installation. If, for example, something in the model doesn't exist, then you can get rid of it from the model. If there are elements within the model elements within the building that are not in the model, then you can add them. And you could also take it to a more detailed level, looking at a more granular uniformat structure or breaking down types of specific elements, roof, walls, finishes, things like that. So rather than just having generic roof, you can list the type of roof. And that gives you a little bit more information and a little bit more granularity and a little bit more value in your data set, because it's not as hypothetical now, it's more real world, but it's still a fairly high level data set. But really, this is just you working with your partner that you've brought on to help you build this data set to expand and make it a little bit more real world. So again, the top line was that building type data that I showed you last time. Now, the second layer is that client-informed model. So you'll see a couple of things that have changed here. So first of all, again, the building was constructed in 1967, which was what the date of installation was assumed in the building type model. In this particular case, there was a replacement of the HVAC equipment in 1992. So that would be a piece of data that was shared by the client informing the model, hence client-informed model, which would then adjust the replacement year from 2024 to 2027. The cost doesn't change because the system is still, like, we're still at that Uniformat level 2 level. But you see here now from our asset management plan, instead of having $2 million in 24, that $2 million would get moved out to a more real world 2027. Again, purely life cycle model. Nobody's gone out to look at this equipment, but theoretically, it should last through to 2027. So the last of our three types of modeled data is what we call a validated model. So this is where you do the whole modeling process, whether that's a building type model or a client informed model. And you basically do a limited on-site assessment to make adjustments to the modeled data. So you can adjust replacement values. You can add a condition rating because you're actually looking at the specific equipment in the building. You can also add and subtract from the modeled information. You could break down types, as we said in the client informed model, and then basically you can also capture photos. Some do, some don't, but that is an example of some of the ways that you just it makes it more real world. And typically you're validating things in the short term, less than 5 years, and everything outside of that timeline is more purely modeled or life cycle data. So here's an example. I apologize. I just realized the title says client informed, but this is actually a validated model sample. You'll see you've actually got some photos of the various elements of the HVAC. We're still at that uniformat level 2 HVAC. The date of installation was updated, but you see here now we have a condition rating and photos with some explanation of the different elements that you see. So again, this data set is going to provide you a little bit more value. The photos can help back it up, and it becomes a little bit more real world because you generally aren't going to have things in the near term in your model that aren't actually in the building, as you could potentially have in a purely desktop exercise based on a building type model. So this is, again, a more granular data set, but still not a full element level inventory, which we're going to get to in just a second. So this is a somewhat non-scientific graph of the amount of effort and therefore cost and also time that it takes to gather up each of these types of data, including, I've actually built this out for time limited and element as well, but we've covered off the first part. But you'll see a validated model does take considerably more time and effort and have a higher cost than a client-informed model. And again, the building type model is the quickest, cheapest option to get you across the line. The element level inventory is the most detailed, which we'll talk to in just a moment. But one of the issues that comes up again and again with municipal and non-municipal customers is the current replacement value for their facilities. And so there's we just did a webinar on current replacement, a whole hour-long webinar on current replacement value. So I don't have time to go into it in detail today, particularly for those who aren't super familiar with facility condition assessment. In order to get a facility condition index, or the FCI, which is your typical benchmark, which often is a level of service for facilities in an asset management plan, you're going to have a current replacement value for each building. And so the CRV, or current replacement value, is the cost to build a building of similar type, of similar size, based on similar elements on a greenfield site. So it's not the cost to demolish your building and rebuild it. It's the cost, if I had to build this same building over here from scratch, how much would that cost me? It's also not the market value of the building, right? So I could sell that building for $2 million. Doesn't matter. This is pure labor and materials to build the building with a few added factors. So there are 4 kind of primary methodologies for calculating CRVs. One is insurable value. So if you have an insurable value insurable value that you use typically for insurance for your facilities, you can also use that as your current replacement value. There's a simple square footage model, which is basically just this type of building is this amount per square foot. There's sum of the parts, which is where you have element replacement costs for all the elements in the building, and you add all those up, and that becomes your current replacement value. And there's the weighted square footage value, which is basically if you have a multi-purpose building that you have space measurements for, you basically develop different costs per square foot, and you multiply the area of the building by those costs per square foot to calculate your CRV. So like I said, folks, this is like an hour-long topic all to itself. I don't have the time to recreate, or sorry, to provide information. But as I said, we recently did a webinar and have a white paper on CRVs. So we're just going to put a poll question up, and for those of you that would like additional information on how to calculate your CRVs, this is the opportunity to put that out there. So if we could launch that poll, please.
So that pulls up. We're just starting to see some responses come in on if people would like a copy of the white paper on calculating CRVs, as well as a link to the webinar. And Bill, I'll just let you know when the responses kind of tail off there.
Awesome. Thanks, Alicia.
Wonderful. So 23 responded yes to that. So it seems like CRE is a pretty hot topic.
Excellent. Yeah, it's often I always say CRV is the forgotten half of the facility condition index, or FCI, because during your FCA you get your so facility condition index is your deferred capital renewal and needs in a given period of time divided by the current replacement value. And so your FCA will give you your deferred capital renewal and maintenance needs over a period of time, but it doesn't give you a CRV explicitly. So again, with regards to the asset management plan, if you want to use the FCI as the level of service in your asset management plan, you need not to forget about those CRVs, and it's a lot easier to get them and develop that strategy at the outset of a project, as opposed to waiting until afterwards and go, wait a minute, I don't have an FCI. So that's why we wanted to bring it up. So we'll send that information out to you shortly here after the webinar. And hopefully that will give you a sense of kind of the best way for you and your organization to calculate your CRVs and therefore your FCIs. So the modeling exercise, as I mentioned, right, is a much a lower effort, lower cost, lower time scope of work. So between now and July 1st, that is something that is possible because it is a desktop exercise. It doesn't require coordination with the site, but it is high level and depending on where you fall in that continuum, more or less real world as opposed to theoretical. So we're going to talk about, what to do after July, or this would be if you're small or you can jump on it quickly, what you might be able to do actually even before the July deadline, which is really what we'll call that element level inventory. So we're going to jump over the time limited forecast, because the reason that I jumped over that, folks, is the time limited forecast is typically a 5 or a 10-year time horizon. And the problem with that from an asset management planning perspective is your time horizon shrinks every year. And so most asset management plans, in my experience, want to forecast out at least 10 years, if not longer. And in order to do a facility condition index, if you use a 5-year FCI, in order to produce a 5-year FCI over a 10-year period, you actually need 15 years worth of data. So by the time you get up to 15, 20 years worth of data, you're better off to just do an element level inventory, because then basically what an element level inventory is it tells you everything that's in it inventories and gives detailed information on all the elements within a building, regardless of the remaining useful life. So in a time limited forecast, you're only going to get details. If you say, hey, do a 10-year FCA, you're only going to get detailed information on, or recommendations on, the elements that need attention in the next 10 years. So basically, if we or someone were to think that it was going to last 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, you're really not going to get a recommendation for that. You're just going to get, hey, do this in the next 10 years, and that's it. Which, again, from an asset management perspective, doesn't give you the opportunity to do longer term planning. But once you get that detailed information on everything within the building, then in theory, you could do an infinite forecast of future capital needs. You can basically do a 50-year plan or a 100-year plan. We have some municipal clients that they've been asked to do a 100-year plan. Well, if you only have 10 years worth of data, it's impossible to do a 100-year plan. Additionally, you're going to capture photographs of everything within the building. And I'll be honest, where I've seen probably one of the most valuable parts of a facility condition assessment that I've seen for organizations to help make business cases to get additional funds to fix their buildings is when they can pull up a photo, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, a picture can be worth $1 million if you can demonstrate to your council the severity of an issue or deterioration within your building. So having those photos provides huge value. You can also, if you wish, start gathering make, model, and serial number or other detailed information on some of those elements and individual pieces of equipment, which can also help you, back to the integrated asset management framework, start to focus on that operational excellence, which is sort of the second area of the integrated asset management Venn diagram that we showed before. If you're going to do a longer term forecast, you're going to want to at least consider what we call cyclical renewals. And what a cyclical renewal is if your team on the asset management side wants to put a 50-year forecast, even say a 25-year forecast for your facilities, you're going to replace some elements more than once within that 25 or 50-year time horizon. And so cyclical renewals show a secondary replacement of an element. Like carpet is probably the simplest one, right? Carpet has an EUL of about 10 years. So if your FCA says replace the carpet this year in 2025, in theory, you're going to have to do it again in 35 and again in 45. And so if you do a forecast for 30 years, you could have 3 or 4 carpet replacements included in there, which are real dollars. So from an asset management perspective, the ability to track and forecast cyclical renewals gives you a more complete and real world picture. Now, you may not do it. You may let that carpet go 15 years. That's a capital planning decision. But from an asset management planning perspective, you're going to want to consider at least whether you include those cyclical renewals for all the elements. Now, if you don't have all the element data gathered, as in the time limited forecast, which we talked about briefly, or based on the model data, then you're not going to be able to get a detailed data set that allows for those cyclical renewals to be calculated. So the element level inventory is the most advanced data set and is the best for asset management planning. So if you do have the ability to get this done in order to tie into your asset management plan, this would be the recommendation to go forward. If you need to get something, then you may want to consider the modeled data set that we talked about before. So what are the benefits of ELI, which is the element level inventory? Well, it's the ability to plan for an entire life cycle of a building, which allows you to do longer term forecasts, really an unlimited forecast, and longer term facility condition index trends. Your detailed data can help and more easily integrate with operations and maintenance planning, as I said before. In theory, if you keep your data up to date in between assessments, if you do an updated assessment 5 years or so after, that's sort of industry standard. Do a facility condition assessment every 5 years on your facilities. If you do that, the effort required and therefore the cost to do the updated assessment should be less because you've gathered all that information initially. You've kept it up to date, so somebody should just be coming in to really update the condition of the various elements within the building. And as I mentioned for CRV, the element level inventory also allows for quick and easy current replacement value calculation using the sum of the parts methodology. So if you have a detailed element replacement cost for all the elements within the building, you sum those up, you can actually get a CRV using sum of the parts. If you don't have all the elements within the building, then you can't do the sum of the parts. There are other ways to do it, but you just can't do sum of the parts. So here is an example of the element level inventory. So you'll see here, the first thing to note is we've broken down the uniformat code. So before we just had D30 HVAC, now we've broken out the boiler separate from the other elements. Like HVAC, as I said, could have 20 or 30 elements in it. The model data was at a higher level, level 2. This is down to level 4. So here we're talking about a specific boiler. That boiler was installed in 1998, which again, we had estimated 1992 in the client-informed model. So we're more granular, a different expected useful life because we're talking about a boiler, not the entire HVAC system. So the replacement years projected, we have a quantity, we have a unit of measure, we have a condition rating, and then in this example, we've gathered up the make, the model, the serial number. We have a unit cost, that is the quantity times the unit cost gives us the recommendation cost. So a much more granular and fulsome data set. You get a condition and a description narrative of the equipment, whoops, sorry, and you get some additional more detailed photos. So this is an example of a photo of the boiler and the nameplate to go with it. So this is data, as we said before, that's really going to, excuse me, sorry, that's really going to satisfy your asset management planning requirements, but also allow you to really focus on maintaining a state of good repair for your buildings and potentially also integrating with your operations and maintenance planning process. So one of the things I noticed when we reviewed the list and based on a number of the folks that were registered, a lot of smaller municipalities, I think, were registered for this one, and there are some baseline costs like project management and mobilization and other costs like that for smaller portfolios there's not as much opportunity to amortize those costs over multiple buildings. If you only have 7 or 8 buildings versus 30 buildings, the project management cost for 7 buildings FCA project versus 30, it's not linear. It's not like 2 and or whatever 4.5 times. So there are higher costs per building for smaller portfolios. One thing that we have seen customers do in the past is a group of proximate peer municipalities, typically of the smaller size, that are facing the same challenge, will bundle together. And so instead of 5 municipalities going to the market to do 5 FCAs each, a lead group would come forward to manage the process, the procurement, the consultant, all of that piece, set a standard scope for all, but then represent multiple municipalities. We did this in Alberta a few years ago. There was one organization, they banded together, I think it was 7 different municipal organizations. They all went out, they all agreed on a scope of work, they went out to market, they got that information, and they reduced the overall cost compared to doing 7 separate projects. Now there are some challenges to this, right? I mean, obviously you've got to have a standardized scope, you've got to have agreement, you've got to be able to do it from a procurement perspective, and everybody's got to be online. But it is a way to potentially save some time and money by minimizing the overall costs if you're able to do a truly cooperative procurement through a cooperative procurement agency or another procurement methodology. So I know it's not necessarily possible for everyone, but we have seen examples where this worked and everybody saved a considerable amount of money compared to going it alone. So the last thing that people often forget is once you do this work, whether it's the model data or the element level inventory, once the FCAs are over, you've got to keep the data up to date. So you're going to do capital projects. You're going to remove, you may demolish or sell buildings. You may acquire or build new buildings. And if you don't keep that up, then your data basically rots on the vine or goes stale very, very quickly. So again, you want to make sure that you've got a process on how and when your data will be updated. Who needs to have provide information? There's sometimes a planning and design team. There might be a construction team. Who on those teams is going to make decisions and provide information to the individual or individuals that are going to be responsible for the data? And so who is that going to be? Is it going to be an existing staff member? Are we going to add it to somebody's to-do list? Are we going to bring in a new hire? Or are we going to hire a third party to keep that data up to date? But what you don't want to do is go out and make an investment, whether that's model data or an element level inventory or a combination of the two, and then just let that data rot on the vine. You need to be thinking about how you're going to do it, who's going to be involved, and who's going to have ultimate responsibility for keeping that data up to date. So one last quick thought here before we get into QA/QC is, for those of you in the facility world, you've probably heard the term deferred maintenance, or DM. At Roth IAMS, we're on a little bit of a campaign to abolish the term deferred maintenance. Most of what people call deferred maintenance is actually deferred capital renewal with a little bit of deferred maintenance involved in it. And so if you or your organization is commonly or are commonly using the term deferred maintenance, we might recommend you consider something else. We typically, if you've heard me say a couple of times in the presentation, we use the term deferred capital renewal and maintenance. It doesn't roll off the tongue the same way DM or deferred maintenance does, but it is more real world and realistic, defining and describing to non-facilities folks that sit on our councils and our CAOs and other things like that. So it's a more realistic representation of the challenges that we face around aging infrastructure, particularly in the building space. Pardon me. So we'll open it up to QA. Alicia, if there's anything in the chat, feel free to read off. And if you haven't put anything in the chat, but you do have questions, please add it to the chat.
Yeah, so just while we're waiting for potential questions to come in the chat, just a couple of housekeeping items. There will be a copy of the slide deck as well as a recording of the webinar will be circulated out to everyone who attended today. And then at the end of this presentation, there is a brief feedback poll. It only takes 1 minute to fill out, but it really helps us to make sure that we're providing the content that helps support facility managers. And Bill, Johnny had a question on, would it be possible to be sent a generic template for FCAs to use as a starting point?
I guess, Johnny, and I don't know if we can turn on mics here, folks, or we just get a little bit of back and forth in the question. Are you talking about like a generic report template, or are you talking about a data template, Johnny? I'm not sure which it is. I think either would be possible, just I want to understand exactly what you're looking for. And just maybe while we're waiting for Johnny to type a response or anybody else to type questions, I know a lot of folks sort of ask, what is an FCA, and maybe aren't super familiar with facility condition assessments, asset management planning, or anything like that. I wanted to pull this up. This QR code will take you to our thought leadership page. We have tons of information in there, other webinars, white papers, blog posts from beginner, like, how do I get started? What is an FCA? All the way through to more advanced topics like the integration between capital and maintenance. But for those of you that are maybe feeling a little overwhelmed, maybe even by the content of this presentation, there's a lot of basic kind of first principle stuff that you can find on our website through our thought leadership page as well. So Alicia, has Johnny typed in?
He did. So he's looking for an example that he saw on an earlier slide, and it had the substructure and the stairs. I mean, it sounds like maybe a redacted report might be helpful. Yeah. He's just looking for a template that shows the uniformat codes and that sort of content.
Sure. Yeah, we can send something through. I think you're probably talking about this one, right?
Yes, that's the one he's looking for. Beautiful.
Yeah, we can send through. We'll send through a sample of a typical uniformat structure. It's based on the uniformat is based on an ASTM standard, so we can send a sample of a level, down to level 3 uniformat standard for you to consider, Johnny, for sure.
Wonderful. And then Christian was asking, what is the time frame for an FCA? Is this due every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, etc.?
So typically, in my opinion, FCA should be done on around a 5-year cycle. There are some out there that'll tell you to do it every 3 years. I think 3 years is way too short a time frame. The more you keep your data up to date after the assessment, the longer you can go, in theory, without reassessing. But the industry standard sort of benchmark is assess every 5 years. For the Ontario colleges and universities, we assess every 5 years. For hospitals, we do every 4. That's their drivers. For a number of our municipal customers, we're on a 5-year cycle. So if you were to assess this year, you would assess again, I guess, in 2030.
Wonderful. And Mara would like to know which model would include a structural assessment.
So the model data will model out a future renewal of the structure. In order to get a structural assessment, visual assessment of your structure, you would have to do the element level inventory. However, an element level inventory and a structural assessment aren't exactly the same thing. If there are known potential issues, and I guess one thing, one general note, a facility condition assessment. So a model is a desktop exercise. If you do a validated model, there's a little bit of on-site review, but the element level inventory is where you're going to get a full visual assessment of a building, but it's visual only. There's no intrusive testing or engineering testing. So if you've got a building where you like say an arena and you need to do snow load calculations, or you want to do something like that, that's a little bit of an FCA plus. That would be an FCA plus, a more detailed structural assessment. But the structure would be included in a model from a desktop perspective and in an element level inventory from a visual perspective, as well as supplemented by feedback from your staff on issues. But in order to do a structural assessment, that would sort of be an element level inventory plus. Other questions, Alicia?
Not at the moment, but maybe we'll just give people 1 or 2 more minutes to see if they have any other questions for us.
Perfect.
And Gurpreet, maybe you want to put the feedback.
Yeah, let's put that poll up. Yeah. Well, thank you all for attending. Again, please feel free to connect with me directly. These are my details. Our website is there. And yeah, if this all does feel a little overwhelming, please do check out our thought leadership page. We've designed it to help inform people of all kind of experience levels, more information on how to solve your deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog crisis. And we will follow up for those that requested the CRV information. We'll follow up with that, as well as a general follow-up. Last call for questions. Otherwise, we'll just...
Yep, there's one final question here from Cindy.
Perfect.
She's asking if there are recommendations from the vendor side for municipalities completing RFPs, simpler format or more detail.
So I don't think there's not necessarily a library or anywhere to go from an RFP. Like, I'm not aware of sort of an RFP library. I know, I mean, we respond to a lot of RFPs. So we can maybe, if you're interested, maybe send an email and we can send a couple of samples of example municipal RFPs. But other than our own internal library, I'm not aware of one. If you do work with one of the 2 cooperatives, they might be, or other cooperatives other than Canoe and OECM, they might be able to provide you with some information as well, in terms of what to include in your RFP. But if you would like some recent samples of other public RFPs, if you send us an email, we can send some examples. Again, we don't attest to whether they're good or bad or whether they're going to meet your criteria or not, but we do have some that based on polls that we've done and things we've responded to.
Cindy, does that answer your question?
Yeah, hopefully that was what you were looking for.
Just give her a minute to respond.
While Cindy's responding, again, I just want to say thank you all very much for attending. I know this was a lot. It was a bit of a roller coaster, but we're coming in fast to that deadline. So I wanted to cover off a fairly wide range of topics. Happy to continue the conversation after this. If there are public RFPs, know that we'll be looking for those. We watch for those. If you do want to go the route of a cooperative, again, we do have those available as well. If there's no further questions, we'll wrap everything up and give everybody a couple of minutes. Oh,
there's a couple here, Bill. So Cindy responded
back. Look at that. Keep them coming, guys. Keep them coming.
She said yes, but she's also looking for preference, as some can become quite wordy. So Cindy, it sounds like maybe you're looking for the vendor experience on RFP, but we'd be happy to hop on a call and maybe share some more details on that piece if that's what you're looking for. we've definitely responded to enough of them to maybe have some feedback for you. And then
Absolutely.
Mara is asking, does a GHG study fall under this at all?
Again, it's much like the structural. That would GHG would typically be more of an energy audit, a level 1 or level 2, which is based on ASHRAE standards. Energy audit. You can get some sort of high level recommendations for potential energy savings based on a condition assessment. So if you're replacing, say, a boiler and it's a low efficiency boiler, because an FCA is replacing kind, so it's a similar version, a new version of the same equipment you have, no upgrade. There's an option to get some narrative information on potential energy savings, but if you really want to get into GHG reduction calculations, that's more of an energy audit, which again can be done in connection and collaboration with a facility condition assessment, but it is a different or enhanced scope of work, much like that structural, the detailed structural we talked about earlier.
Great. And maybe just give one more minute to see if any trailing responses or if Mara has any follow-up on that comment. But otherwise, I think that's it for questions.
Awesome. Well, once again, everybody, thank you very much. Good luck on your journey to develop a compliant asset management plan. I hope that this added value to you, and I hope that it gave you a little bit more of a framework with which to consider gathering that facility condition assessment data for your portfolio. And I thank you all very much for your time, and happy to carry on the conversation after the webinar ends if you so wish. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.